What if the legacy you leave isn't just about what you leave behind, but what you set in motion today? What if your greatest impact isn't measured in possessions or accomplishment, but in the faith, hope, and stories you pass on to the people you love the most? Today, we're having a powerful conversation about legacy, hope, and living with eternal purpose. Welcome to the Habits of Hope podcast, where we believe a life rooted in hope grows through daily rhythms that help us trust God's faithfulness, even in life's hardest seasons. I'm Ginger Harrington, podcaster, speaker, and author of Holy in the Moment. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Larissa Tequer, also known as Grateful Chick, and founder of the Cultivate community. Our guest, Bill High, has devoted his life to helping families live with intention today to leave a legacy that lasts for generations. After more than a decade of practicing law, Bill has shifted his career toward philanthropy, helping establish a donor-advised foundation and facilitating over $5 billion in family giving. Through his work with families, he helps them define their vision, values, and practices so they can live with intention today and impact future generations. As co-author of The Legacy Life with David Green, founder of Hobby Lobby, Bill offers deep wisdom on living generously, sharing stories, and creating rhythms that share lasting hope. Bill, welcome. It's such a gift to have you with us today.
So glad to be with you both. Super excited to be talking to you.
We're so excited to talk about your book, The Legacy Life. We want to hear your heart about this message in this book. Larissa, I know you've got a couple of thoughts for us.
Yeah, Bill, again, thank you so much for joining us today. Our listeners love practical wisdom, but they also connect deeply with stories. Today, we want to share your journey of faith and hope, the practices that shape family legacy, and how we can intentionally invest in what matters most, because this conversation goes far beyond passing down wealth. It's also about passing down purpose. Bill, you often share that you grew up in a broken home and lost your dad at a young age. How has that shaped your understanding of legacy, hope, and family?
Yeah, the short story is that I grew up, my dad was the oldest of 8, lived in a 3-room log cabin in the hills of the Missouri Ozarks. So you can do the math. They had a lot more kids than room in the house. They were very poor, a bit backwards. He joined the service and went over to Japan, where he met my mom and brought her back. Together they had 6 kids. I'm number 5 out of 6. But we were a welfare family growing up, very poor. I don't remember, frankly, living in a house that had a working toilet till I was like 16. So pretty backwards. We were the family that Salvation Army brought gifts to. And while we're grateful for that, they weren't always the best gifts. But the net effect of all that is we did not grow up in a family of faith. He died when I was 12. And at the point of his death, a couple years prior to that, a family down the street had given us a children's Bible story book. And that's really how I came to faith, is through the story of the Bible. As he passed away, a teacher at school gave us the assignment to write in a journal for 30 days. And in the course of keeping that journal, I just kept going. And I've been journaling now for about 50 years. But one of the things that I journaled early on, they say that wherever your deepest wound is where the flower grows. And so the loss of my father really led to this place of passion for family. One of my earliest journal entries, I wrote down, I said, man, I'd love to have a great family and to be part of a great family. So that's been the journey that I've been on, the search for family and what it really means to live in community well.
Wow, you brought up some really great points that I know are going to encourage our listeners, because it really encouraged me. And I was going to ask you about a hope story, and I feel like you shared that well. And you're talking to 2 ladies who love to talk about all things journaling. So thank you for bringing that up, because not a lot of men talk about journaling. And I love that that's such a great tool that the Lord has used to speak in and through you. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I'd say that journaling is cheaper than therapy.
I agree. I agree.
It is. And I'm going to hop in here and point out a little bit of overlap because I think that's always really fun to be able to connect. Bill, Larissa, and I actually met in Okinawa, Japan, where our Marine Corps husbands were stationed for 4 years. And then another overlap is just in origin stories. Larissa's had some experiences in her life that I just feel like there's some important connections that drive home the importance of this topic.
Yeah, I appreciate your transparency and honesty, Bill, because I was adopted and I came from a mother who I ended up with 11 brothers and sisters and got to be reunited with my biological family, which was very sweet. But, there's always, complications in families and raised by a single mom. So I definitely understand the humble beginnings. And then, unfortunately, 5 years ago, my Marine went home to be with Jesus. So I definitely understand loss at a deep level. And I know a lot of our listeners understand grief, at least at some level, and interesting upbringing. So thank you again. And this legacy piece, legacy is a word I have loved for a very long time. So I love that we're going to deep dive into this today.
Even going back to the whole Japan thing, my mom is almost 97. She'll turn 97 in a few weeks. She lives with us, but she grew up during World War II when the Americans were bombing. They lost a house. She had to go live out in the country. So her perspective on World War II is a bit different. But I think to your point, I mean, this is habits of hope, right? That's what we're talking about here. I just certainly would love to encourage your listeners with the idea that no matter what your family background, your family does not define you. It only informs you. It is only God the Father who gives you your identity because you're a new child and a new creation in Christ. So God does give us families. We all grow up in them, or even if we're adopted or otherwise, it informs us, but it does not define us. Only God the Father does the defining.
I love that you pointed that out, Bill, because that is such an important truth. And at the heart of this podcast, we really love helping our listeners practice hope in everyday ways. Beyond journaling, is there a specific habit or spiritual practice in your life that you lean on and it keeps you grounded when life feels uncertain?
Sure, the biggest practice is actually the practice of gratitude. So while this is something that I do within my journaling, but it's the same kind of practice, you don't have to journal to do this, but I start every day with this idea of journaling where I just start off and I say, Lord, I'm most grateful. It's a brand new day and I have new opportunity. And so just the practice of gratitude is one of the simplest things to start every single day with, to say, wow, it's a brand new day. I could have passed during the night. Worse things could have happened, but here I am, and you've given me a day teeming with opportunity. Sometimes I'll go deeper within that, and I had a friend encourage me years ago with the idea of just writing down my 10 things I'm most grateful for. I don't do that every single day, but point is just to recount and to remember. That's, I think, one of the best practices you can do, because as you do that, you can really look at the little things that God has done for you throughout your life.
Yeah, that is so good, Bill. And here's another kind of thing that we have in common. So my whole platform is built around gratitude, but definitely gratitude changes everything. And I love hearing you say that because, again, I know that some people think gratitude can be kind of like maybe fluffy, and it really is so much more than that. It is so gritty. And some days, like the day that my husband died, I still found 3 things to be grateful for, because there's always something to be grateful for, even on the hardest days. You've talked a little bit about legacy, and you said that legacy isn't just for the wealthy or the well-known. You mentioned it doesn't matter how we got our beginning or where our families are from. How do you define legacy in a way that's accessible for everyday families?
Yeah, so everybody's going to have a legacy. That's one of the first things that we start with. And legacies are not neutral. They are good or bad. And so if we just start from that premise, 2 Corinthians 5:10 says that we will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ and be held accountable in the body for the things that we've done, whether good or bad. all means all, and that's all means. That's what I heard a pastor say once. So that means all of us. That's every single person listening to this podcast, or even if they're not listening to podcasts. Maybe they should be. But point is we're all going to be held accountable. And I've heard it said, of course, legacy is what we leave behind. But the problem with that definition is it says I can kind of leave it. And I've heard people who are trying to plan their estate say stuff like, well, I'll let my kids figure it out. But the truth is that all of us someday are going to stand before Jesus in heaven. He's going to say, how'd you do, Ginger? How'd you do, Larissa? And he's going to say, what did I put in your hand? And how did you do with what I gave you? That's this idea of legacies, what we set in motion. That's the powerful idea, is that we're all going to be there in heaven someday, and some of it will be great reunions. There'll be friends and family. There'll probably be some people who's like, man, how'd you get in the door, And there'll be some people that'll be like, yeah, I didn't know you'd be here, kind of stuff. But we're going to be there, and it's going to be this great and wonderful celebration. And so what we want to do, just like Matthew 6:19 through 21 talks about, is we want to make sure that we're doing as much as we possibly can to invest in heaven. That's going to be our legacy.
Well, Bill, what kinds of things can we pass down that help have that beautiful thing to stand before the throne of God and say, Lord, this is what I did with what you put in my hands?
The first thing that we typically talk about is that you just recognize that the first part of legacy is really what are the stories that you pass down. And the stories that you pass down can be, frankly, not only whether you've got kids or not, you're widowed, divorced, all those kind of things, but we all got a story. And we're working to write and to create beautiful stories. So the first thing that we typically say is, what are the 10 stories that you most want to tell, not only to your family, your children, grandchildren? What are the 10 stories? Those are usually those stories of hope. They're the stories of despair, the moments of loss, moments of salvation. And you see that the scriptures really teach this idea. How does the Passover begin? The Passover begins with the youngest child that says, why is this night so different from all the other nights? So that's the first thing that we say is, what are your stories that you're telling among your family? The second thing that we talk about in terms of really starting is you got to write down your values. What are the 5 family values? We look at the Old Testament and the 10 Commandments basically as being this idea of a set of values. Love God, love people. And if you start with that basic idea, every family can write down their values. And again, this applies to whether you're married or not. Everybody can live by a set of values. And the power of values is that they're both protective and attractive. And when people say, wow, Ginger's living out her values, they probably say, I don't know why that woman is so weird, but I wonder if I need to talk to her because she lives differently. That's the power. So those are just a couple simple little things that we see that every family can apply, as they can say, here's our stories and here's our values.
That's so encouraging, Bill, because it gives hope to families at every stage, no matter what size your family or what type, what shape, however it is. We can all pass down stories, and we can all nail down with intentionality what are our values, and we can all speak faith into the next generation. In the legacy life, you and David Green talk about the power of living with a multi-generational perspective. What are some simple and intentional practices families can begin today to strengthen their faith, nurture relationships, and build legacy?
Well, number one is we just stress that you've got to develop a biblical worldview around family. And the biblical view of family really is a multi-generational legacy. Nobody starts out having kids and thinking, man, I'm going to ruin them. God's design is that we would all invest in our children, who would invest in their children, who would invest in their children. Psalm 78 verses 5 through 7 is kind of one of those hallmark verses that we talk about, that our fathers should tell their children, who would tell their children, the children yet unborn, and even the children yet to come, 5 generations. So that's one of the very first things, is to recognize that we all carry this mantle of responsibility to pass on a set of values from one generation to the next. When you have that kind of worldview, then you can actually go to the next step, which is what I said, is that if you understand your stories, and then if you know your values, one of the things that the scriptures teach from there is, what are your celebrations? What are the places where you intentionally celebrate God's activity in your life? The Jewish people were very clear about this idea that there were at least 7 times a year where they would pull away and they would remember, rest, and reflect and say, here's what God's done, not what I've done. Here's what God has done in our life. So there's just a handful of things, but it's intentional, not just getting together at Thanksgiving or getting together at Christmas. It is taking the time to say, here's what God has done in our family, here's our values, and continuing to teach that.
That is so important, because I think the more that we build this mindset, the easier it is to come out organically and come to mind in the moment when we have those beautiful moments to share a story, or to have a teaching moment, or a moment of remembering, hey, remember Grandpa when he did da 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 da, or it can look different ways at different times. For families who feel behind or overwhelmed, where would you encourage them to start small, maybe with one simple thing?
Yeah, we've actually got a whole chapter in the book about the idea of the broken legacy. And if you take a look at so many of the stories in the Bible, you start out and think, man, what good is going to come out of this? And so we just say that one of the simplest things you can do for yourself is read the scriptures cover to cover every year and remind yourself of where God shows up in the broken. Take David and Bathsheba. What good could come out of that? An adulterous affair with a conspiracy for murder. And yet God produces Solomon, who builds the world's biggest temple that is the most beautiful. And again, what happens out of that? Well, maybe not that much good, you would think, but the scriptures again remind us, Matthew 1:17, that there are 42 generations from Abraham to the time of Christ, 62 generations, by the way, from Adam. So it's a reminder that God's got the long view in mind, and that's just a great encouragement for us.
I love how you frame this, Bill, because it's not about doing everything perfectly, but about choosing meaningful practices that ripple out into generations. And coming from somebody who's overcoming perfectionism, that is so good to hear. So you talk about generosity being integral to family legacy. Why is giving of time, talent, and treasure so powerful in building culture across generations?
The other predominant worldview around family is a hyper-individualistic viewpoint. So you got, if you will, the biblical worldview, which is family as a team, and the Western view, which is family is really about raising up individuals to go off and be independent. And the problem with this hyper-individualistic worldview that we live in today, it's a consumer kind of mindset. It is the fact that it is about me. It's about what I'm going to buy, what I'm going to spend my time on. And that's frankly one reason why kids aren't having kids today, because they'd rather be skiing in the mountains and have the freedom to go off and do their thing. Man, as you know, being a parent is a lifelong thing. It is a lot of work and sacrifice. So generosity is a symptom of a heart that says we're a team and we're committed to the idea of community. If you have generous kids, grandkids, I can almost guarantee that you're going to have success inside of your family. But it is a learned art. It is not something that's natural.
Yeah, that's good. And our pastor just recently talked about having that generous heart, and that's really at the center of our faith is being generous. We're called to be generous. And so could you share a memorable moment or an example where generosity unlocked deeper family connection or faith for you or in your family?
One of the simple things that we always practice with our kids is the idea of random generosity. And the idea of random generosity is you give, like we would give our kids $100 at Thanksgiving, as a for instance. And the goal was to give away that $100 bill, or we might break it up before Christmas, and then tell the stories of what happened when we gave that away. And both of my sons in particular, that was one of the things most meaningful to them. In one case, like my son had gone off to college, my oldest son had gone off to college, and we went over to visit him for lunch one day and gave him, like $20 because he needed to go buy some cold medicine. He had a cold and we felt like he needed to take care of himself. We drive back to Kansas City and then we call him. It's like, hey, did you go get the cold medicine? He's like, no. It's like, I was at a coffee shop and I felt like God wanted me to give some money to these couple people over here. And we're like, what? You got to be kidding. You need the cold medicine. But how do you argue with a kid who's trying to be generous? Because that means that you're looking out and you're paying attention to others. My youngest son, not too long ago, told us about how his life would be different. He'd be saving more for retirement and like if he wasn't given so much. And that's, again, when you know that you've got something that's sticking, is that when people are being generous and saying something's bigger than me.
That's such a great story. And I think lots of parents can just really learn from that. What that does is it like teaches them to look for opportunities to be generous and what adventure they will have throughout their lifetime with the Lord, knowing that He can entrust them to find those or respond to them generous opportunities. So, Rissa, have you got anything else for Bill?
So, yeah, it's just a powerful reminder that legacy isn't just written on paper and isn't just about wealth, as we said earlier, but it's told and retold in the moments we choose to remember, like Ginger was just saying. So you co-wrote The Legacy Life with David Green, who's the founder of Hobby Lobby. What was it like collaborating with him? And how did that partnership shape the message of this book?
I've had the unique privilege of being able to work with David and the family over the last 20, 25 years. So this is not something that's new in the making. And this book in particular has really been borne out by the family story over the years. Although there's some new stories in the book, never before revealed. I think at the end of the day, what I see about David Green and his family really is this idea, one simple idea, which is they really want to listen to God. They want to hear from Him and let Him speak and then obey, even if it doesn't make sense. That's a hard test for a lot of us here. Is we usually want to listen to God and hear from Him so He can tell us what we want. But sometimes God will ask us to do crazy things that don't make any sense and trust Him for what the future looks like. And I think that's been my biggest challenge of hanging out with David Green, is sometimes there's a different number that he wants us to give or a different way to live that says we ought to go. One of our family values, by the way, is the value of adventure. It's the word adventure, by the way, is in the Green family mission statement or the vision statement. And so adventure means a dangerous and uncertain undertaking. It doesn't mean the gusto and, your hair in the wind as you're on the sailboat. It really does mean that there's danger and uncertainty. And I think that's the kind of life that God wants us to live, because that's a life of faith. And when we live that way, and I've seen that in the Green family, we go, hey, that's pretty cool. Let me in for some of that, because that's where our faith really gets discovered in a new and unique way.
Bill, when it comes to writing down your values and things like that, have you got some tangible advice that might be helpful for us?
Consistent with Deuteronomy 6, it's this idea of you got to write these things down. They got to be on your heart. You got to talk about them when you're walking by the way, lying down and rising. But then you got to post it on the door plates of your home. So this is what we do. So this is the high family vision, mission, and values. And so you can see our vision statement. Well, you probably can't see it, but our vision statement is disciples everywhere for generations. So it's a big vision statement. No way we can do it, but God can. And then we have our values. We have an acronym for our values: GASSER, God's Word, generosity, adventure, story, restoration. But we say, man, if every family had this on the wall of their home, it would guide their families for generations. And it's something that you can have dinner time conversation around. Even my wife and I, we do this with our grandkids, and we talk about what do these different values mean. But we find that's the most helpful thing that a young family can do. Certainly the mature family can do it as well, but helpful to put that on the wall of their home. It becomes the constitution, if you will, by which they govern as a family.
I love that. And I love how practical and visual that is, particularly for families that are just getting started with that. What a great way to remind yourself, hey, this is what we are about. This is how we do what we do, even in the nitty gritty. So thank you for sharing that tangible and practical example.
So your own background, law, philanthropy, family consulting, brings unique perspective. How do you weave those experiences into your guidance for families and into this book? You've talked a little bit about that, but was there more you'd like to add?
I've had the chance to work with a lot of families across the country and even across parts of the globe. The formula is still pretty simple, and the formula really comes down to tell me your story. Tell me where you've been. And then you want to ask questions. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says, the purpose in a man's mind is like deep water, but a man of understanding draws it out. And I think that's our job as believers, is to really ask those deep questions to figure out the nerve root. Where do people really live? And when people recognize that you are listening to understand them versus just listening to respond, they want to lean in, because they know that you care. So the formula for what I do most of the time is just that. Tell me your story, and then I'm going to ask questions to try to understand. And then from there, I'm going to trust the Holy Spirit to say, hey, what's this family need? Or, is there sometimes a hard word that needs to be brought to them, or a practice that can make them better and change their trajectory?
Bill, thanks for sharing that. One of the things that is really fun about your website is I see that you've got a legacy building quiz that helps families see where they are in the process. And tell me how you came up with this idea and how you use that quiz to help families.
The ministry of Legacy Stone has come out of all the work that we've done with families over the years. And ultimately what we've seen is that, number one, families need an assessment. How are we doing? And as you appreciate, if you got married, you got kids, then boom, before you know it, you're walking down the aisle at graduation. You're like, wow, that went really fast. And so in the moment, particularly in those early days, you got to have some assessment of how are we doing? And then you got to have a roadmap. We're actually getting ready to film our next set of curriculum in the next couple of days, and it's all about how do you build winning family culture. And the key to winning family culture is a roadmap. You've got to have a culture map where you're intentional about the seasons and the rhythms of family life. It's those families who do that who have a greater chance of winning and being successful, not only now, but for generations to come.
Listening to you talk about this, it feels like doing this book together with David has just got to be a real milestone moment in terms of passion in your heart and legacy that God has been wiring into you. And so tell me a little bit about that moment where you guys got together and decided, hey, let's do a book on this.
Yeah, this book actually comes from the last book. So the last book was a leadership book, and it's called Leadership Not by the Book. So as you can appreciate, Hobby Lobby is one of those stories of a company where they close on Sunday. They pay the highest minimum wage of any minimum wage, not median, minimum wage, and they give away half of their profits. That sounds like a good formula for business success, doesn't it? No. But the bottom line is that led to that last book, Leadership Not by the Book. How does this company work when it shouldn't? One of the chapters in that book was a chapter called Build for 150 Years. Most people build businesses so they can sell them, retire, sit on the beach, and David really believes in this idea of build for 150 years. After we wrote that book, we had a lot of people come to us and say, how do I build for 150 years? And that's what led to this book. And I'm not going to kid you. Certainly this, for me, is the most exciting book that we've done because it's for a broad audience. It's not just for leaders. It's not just for people who have money. This is for every single family who's thinking about, man, how am I going to win today? But how am I going to win for generations too?
Yes. Oh, and I'm very excited about this book, and it's already on my Christmas list for my kids and my own family as they are starting their families. And this is very much on their mind, even at the beginning of their parenting journeys. So as the release of The Legacy Life happens on October 14, what do you hope readers will walk away with, and what's a prayer for families engaging with it?
The number one thing that we hope families walk away with really is the fact that we want to change their worldview. So we sometimes say that we're resetting the theology of family around the globe. And what is that theology? The theology is we're a team. We're not just raising up individuals to go off and do their own thing. We are a team, and we're meant to be a team for generations to come because that's the easiest way for God's gospel to continue to advance around the globe. So that's the first thing. But then we want to be practical. How do you live that out? So you live that out by recognizing I need a clear vision, mission, values. Got to know my stories. I got to repair the past. Got to deal with the conflicts that we've had. And if you do that, you'll change your trajectory, and you can be like some of these families around the world that have 1,000 years of history. Just got a note, by the way, from one family, and I found out they're 400 years into their family story. That changes things when we think about it like that.
That is definitely the long view. And with the book, you also have a devotional coming out at the same time. Can you delineate for us the difference between the book and the devotional?
We learned this the last time, is that the last time we did the book, people were like, wow, could we have a study guide? And we hadn't thought about a study guide. So the devotional really becomes that study guide. So you can read the book, and then you can say, I'm going to work through this with a group of people, whether it's men or women, whatever your small group is, a group of couples, and you can treat it like that. But it's a 90-day devotional that is very scripture focused and goes deep into the scriptures around this idea of what it looks like to live the legacy life.
Thanks for sharing that with us. And friends, we'll put all the links for everything in the show notes, as well as Bill's website and social media contacts. Larissa, before we wrap up, do you have anything else you want to add or ask Bill?
I just so appreciate just talking about legacy, because I feel like I read somewhere, and I can't remember whose book it was, that talked about like when we're praying for things and we pass away, our prayers don't die with us. But it just reminded me that our prayers matter now and for the long haul. And that can also be a huge part of our legacy. And it doesn't end just because we have died. And so I love this legacy piece. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess if you were going to share with us, like, what's one thing that you would like people to take from either specifically The Legacy Life, your book coming out, or just legacy in general, what would that be that you'd like to share with our listeners?
We are living at the greatest time in the history of the world. We've never seen a time where the greatest people, technological, and financial resources have combined in one generation. And the question is, for what purpose? And I think it's because God has in mind this idea of completing the Great Commission. And that's going to take people, it's going to take families who have this worldview that says, man, we're a team and we can accomplish this together. So it's this great adventure that we're on. And just to take off your point, Larissa, it's this idea that our lives are living letters to generations that we'll never see.
Yeah.
And that's what we're writing right now. We may not see it, but the power of what's happening up ahead, it's just going to blow our minds when we get to heaven someday. And he's going to come up and say, hey, Larissa, 4 generations down the line, this person showed up because you were faithful today.
Bill, that is just such an incredible vision and message of hope meets legacy, meets kingdom of God. And thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your heart, your wisdom, and your story. This conversation has been a gift to all of us, reminding us that legacy isn't something that we leave someday. It's something that we're living right now.
Yes, and friends, if today's episode encouraged you, take one small step this week. Have a conversation, share a story, begin a practice. Legacy is built moment by moment, choice by choice.
Well, friends, this is where hope comes in, because when we trust God with our story, He weaves it into something bigger than ourselves. He multiplies the impact, carrying it forward to bless generations that we may never see. That's a hope worth living and a hope worth leaving.